Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're well. It's Rabbi Akiva Males. Today is Wednesday. It is the 13th of September, and we're getting ready for Rosh Hashanah. Because Rosh Hashanah is on the horizon and not a regular Parsha, so that's why we're going to take a look at something fascinating involving Rosh Hashanah. I started looking into this matter a couple of years ago, and we're not going to go through all the sources here, but I want to share them with you. There's some fascinating material here. So let's jump right in. I'm calling this here, do I always need to ask those I wronged for mechila? Mechila is the Hebrew term for forgiveness. We know that Rosh Hashanah begins the time period known as the Aseret Yemei Teshuvah, the 10 days of return. And it's important during the Aseret Yemei Teshuvah that we want to right the wrongs in our life, not just the infractions that may exist in terms of my relationship with God, the mitzvahs bein adam lamakom, but also everything that's bein adam l'chavero, all the interpersonal mitzvahs, all the relationships in my life that I have with other people. I want to right any wrongs that may have occurred during that time. So let's take a look at the first source. This is a Mishnah in Maseches Yoma. And remember, this time period, the 10 days of return, Aseret Yemei Teshuvah, starts with Rosh Hashanah, and it goes through Yom Kippur. So we're going to take a look at a Mishnah that's in Maseches Yoma. And again, this is a Masechta that deals with Yom Kippur, and it deals with Teshuvah. But again, because of the fact that Rosh Hashanah begins, that's Aseret Yemei Teshuvah, this is all very relevant because we're in the process of trying to right the wrongs that we've committed. So let's see what the Mishnah says. Averos shebein adam lamakom. When it comes to any infractions that are a person's relationship with God, between a person and God, Yom Kippur mechaper. So Yom Kippur can go ahead and atone for that. There's something tremendously a gift. The gift of Yom Kippur is a day of cleansing. Is that if we're sincere and we go through Yom Kippur with prayer and with a sense of remorse and a commitment to improve, so everything that we've done wrong between ourselves and God to harm that relationship, Yom Kippur can heal, and Yom Kippur could make amends. However, any infractions that exist in our interpersonal relationships, if I've wronged another person, Yom Kippur doesn't magically take care of that. If I have punched my friend and hurt him, so what? I go into Yom Kippur and I say Al Chait and I bang my chest. What does that make a difference? There's someone out there that I've wronged. If I stole money from someone, I could go through Yom Kippur, but if I haven't returned what I've stolen, I haven't made amends. So the Mishnah continues and it says, any of the sins that are interpersonal, that's a different story. Yom Kippur does not help until I appease my friend. I've got to make sure that I've asked my friend for forgiveness. In Hebrew, we call that mechila. As Zo Darash Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, he learns this from the following pasuk. The pasuk says, when in talking about Yom Kippur, that from all of your sins before God, we will become pure. So what does he mean? He says that explains to us, the pasuk, where it says, the sins that I have that are before God, Yom Kippur could give me a clean slate on. But any of my sins, any of my wrongdoings that are interpersonal between me and another human, Yom Kippur doesn't magically make that right. Until I appease my friend, until I make him feel better, or him or her feel better, until I've asked for forgiveness and I've expressed remorse and told them that I'm not going to do that again. Yom Kippur won't help. That's so hypocritical. I'm going through Yom Kippur. It's a day of asking forgiveness of God. God's going to say, what are you asking me forgiveness for? I'm not the one you wronged. You stole money from Reuven, Shimon, Rivka, Rachel. Return it to them and ask them for forgiveness, and then you could have a word with me. That's what the Mishnah tells us. Very logical. So we're going to take a look into, there's a famous teaching that, again, as far as I know, it's not recorded firsthand. We won't find anything in his own writings about this teaching. However, it was very famous. All of his students would repeat this in his name, and we're going to see it mentioned in a couple of places. I'm just going to take a drink. One of the greatest rabbinic figures of the 19th century was, you see a brief bio of him here on the page, Rabbi Yisrael ben Zev Wolf Lipkin. He was also known as Rabbi Yisrael Salanter because the town he came from was Salant in Lithuania. He lived, you see there, from 1810 to 1883. And this is a bio I found of him online. Was the father of the Musar movement. That was that renewed effort to rediscover all the Jewish ethical teachings and to make them part of our study routine. In Orthodox Judaism, a famed Rosh Yeshiva and Talmudist. The epithet Salanter, why is he known as Salanter, was added to his name since most of his schooling took place in Salant, now the Lithuanian town of Salantai, where he came under the influence. His Rabbi was Rav Yosef Zundel of Salant. So he's always known in Jewish literature and in learning, he's always referred to as Yisrael Salanter, even though that's where he spent just his formative years. That's who he was known as. And again, Rav Yisrael Salanter was thought of as this giant in terms of Musar, in terms of ethical teaching, and rediscovering what classical Jewish sources exist on this matter, and pushing to make this part and parcel of a Jew's study routine, that it shouldn't just be Talmud, Halacha, and Chumash, Tanakh, Mishnah, but also we have to regularly study our classical works of Musar, of ethical teachings. That's what Rabbi Yisrael Salanter was known for. Let's take a look at this next source. This next source is from a contemporary rabbi. He's one of the leading rabbis in Israel, Rav Moshe Sternbach. He lives in Yerushalayim. This is in one of his farm called Moadim Uzmanim, the section on Yom Kippur. So look what he says here. It's in the middle of a much larger piece. It's not going to concern us what the larger piece was. We're here, we want to get this quote. He says, I'm going to answer this question, that what he was dealing with, Shamati, I want to repeat something which I heard, and he tells you where he heard it from. Elio Dessler. I heard this from the famous Rabbi Dessler, again, first Lithuania, then England, and then Israel at the end of his life. Al-Hagon Vatzadik Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. So Rabbi Dessler was repeating something that there was a famous teaching that the family had and the close students of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter had, a famous teaching of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. What was that? Shabir, he explained, there are times, if I'm not careful and I ask my friend for forgiveness, there are times, gufa over avera. There are times that by asking mechila, I could violate a prohibition and I could have done an avera. How's that possible? I'm asking mechila, I'm asking forgiveness. How is it possible that by asking forgiveness, I've done an avera? How? If by asking forgiveness, I'm going to cause my friend pain, so let's say Reuven never knew that I embarrassed him. Let's say Reuven never knew that I made fun of him behind his back. And now comes Yom Kippur. So I go over to Reuven and I say, Reuven, I want to go into Yom Kippur with a clean conscience. And I know you were feeling good about yourself today, but I want to tell you that a week ago, you didn't know this, but an entire room was filled with people, and I took that opportunity to start making fun of you and get everyone laughing at some ridiculous thing that you accidentally did. Now, what did I just do to Reuven? I took his day. He was sailing fine. He had no idea that anyone had ever spoken ill about him. And now me, because I want to feel better and go into Yom Kippur with a clean slate, I go over to Reuven and I told him that I humiliated him in front of a room full of people. He had no idea about this. But because I want to get this off my chest, I ask him for forgiveness now. Is that right? Rabbi Yisrael Salanter said, think about it for a minute. What did I just do? I just caused him pain. He's not going to be able to sleep at night. No, there was a whole room of people that were laughing at him at his expense. So Rabbi Yisrael Salanter says, by asking mechila, I've done an avera in such a case. V'dibra alav lashon hara. Let's say I say that I spoke lashon hara about him. Uchadoma. Eino mitztar klal. So he says, until now, he was not in any pain because he had no idea that I had wronged him. But now that I want to ask forgiveness, now when I ask him forgiveness, and I explain exactly what I did wrong, now I'm letting him know that I wronged him. Now I'm causing him pain. Until now, he wasn't in pain. Ignorance was bliss. He had no idea that there was a room full of people laughing at him. He had no idea. Now, because I want to get this off my chest, I go over to Reuven and I say, I humiliated you and I got a whole room to laugh at you and think of you as a fool, but can you forgive me? I want to go into Yom Kippur with a clean slate. He says, look what you did. I took a person who had no anguish. He had no tsar. He had no bad feelings. And now I just made him miserable. Why? Because I wanted to ask mechila? That's not right. So he says, "V'nikrum lo tsar v'agmas nefesh." I caused them pain. I caused them to feel depressed, down, and gloomy. So what did Rabbi Yisrael Salanter say? How should a person handle that situation? How do I go into Yom Kippur? I wronged someone, but that person doesn't know that I've wronged them. What should I do? Shekai Gavna, in such a case, Roy Listom, I should keep it kind of secret. When I ask Mechila, I should keep it a little bit secret. I should just say, hey, listen, Reuven, we're going into Yom Kippur, and I just want to make sure that I'm going in with a clean slate. In the event I ever wronged you, I can't think of anything specific, but in the event I ever wronged you, do you forgive me? And Reuven says, yeah, sure, no problem. That's what I should do. Why? Because what right do I have to cause him pain? Rabbi Yisrael Salanter cared so much about people's feelings, and he's pointing out is that in my zeal, in my interest to achieve mechila, to achieve forgiveness, I could do worse. I could cause this person pain that the person wasn't aware of before. So I have no right to do that. So what's the best I could do? It's not optimal. You're right. I didn't specifically get the person. I didn't get Reuven to say, Males, I forgive you for humiliating me in that room on August the 1st. I never got him to say that. The best I could do is to say, hey, listen, Reuven, we're going to Yom Kippur. If I wronged you this past year, if I've ever wronged you, can you please forgive me? And I'll say, yeah, that's it. That's the best I can do. But I don't have a right to share with that person exactly what I did wrong, if that's going to cause that person pain and anguish, something that they did not feel before. Very logical, but again, it may not be something that we would have thought of on our own until Rabbi Yisrael pointed it out to us. Apparently, this was a very famous stand of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, and we're going to see how this came up in some fascinating history. Again, as we speak it out, it's very logical, but I think as we'll see, it's not intuitive. A person may have on their own come to the conclusion that if in order to get a clean slate, I've got to be very specific and tell the person how I've wronged them. We're going to take a look now at a section from Sefer Chafetz Chaim on page 2. Chafetz Chaim was written by the famous Rabbi Yisrael Meir HaKohen. He becomes known as the Chafetz Chaim because this was his first book, his sefer that he published, that really brought him incredible amount of attention. And what he did in this book was he basically wrote a Shulchan Aruch about the laws of speech, that he saw there's so many relationships that are ruined, there's so many sins that occur because people don't recognize the harm that we can do with our speech. Speech is a gift, but if we don't use it properly, we can cause a lot of damage and a lot of harm. So he wanted to compile basically a Shulchan Aruch, a halachic work, informing people what we should know about, what we could say, what we shouldn't say, how many averas are involved if we misuse the gift of speech. He wrote this sefer. Is one of his earliest works he wrote. It brought him such fame, he becomes synonymous with that. That's why everyone refers to him as the Chafetz Chaim, even though he went on to write many other works, and perhaps some of them are even studied more than this, like his Mishnah Berurah on halacha. But nonetheless, this was so astonishing and impressed so many people. That's what he becomes known as. And obviously he was an incredible tzaddik. He passed away in 1933. Interestingly, his yortzeit was this past Sunday. The 24th of Elul was 90 years ago. He passed away in 1933. Okay, let's see. In this section here, he's going to be talking about how to do teshuvah. If I have misused the gift of speech, and I have spoken lashon hara, I've spoken slander, gossip, tattletale, whatever it was, I spoke ill about another person. How to make good on this? So let's read a couple lines. So it's paragraph Yud Beis. V'im avar, if a person transgressed, v'sipar lashon hara al chavero, he spoke evil about another person. Uvalasos tshuva, now he wants to make it right. Totally bazeh. Now it depends. Did the people who listened, who overheard the conversation, did they ignore him? And therefore, because they ignored him, they were so outlandish. Let's say I come into a room full of people and I say, I have some juicy lashon hara to tell you about Shimon. And no one believed the word I have to say. So therefore, Shimon's status didn't go down in anyone's eyes. Then the only thing that remains, the only thing that remains is I sinned, I broke one of God's laws. God in his Torah says that lo selech rachil, I'm not supposed to go be a tattlebearer. I'm not supposed to speak gossip. There's all sorts of isurim I could have been over, but that's just between me and God. Since this person, this human, wasn't humiliated, he wasn't affected because no one believed what he said. So my tshuva, it's just between me and God. I could go in Yom Kippur. I went against God's will. He commanded against this. I'm not supposed to speak lashon hara, like I wrote earlier. So what do? Tikuno. How do I repent? How do I make good on that? If I did not cause a human damage, it's only between me and God. So here's the standard tshuva. She's chared al shavar. I have charata. I have remorse about what I've done wrong. I confess to God that, and I spell out to God in my prayers, God, here's where I messed up. And I say, I make a sincere resolution. I'm not going to mess up again. I'm not going to do that again. That's the formula of teshuvah when it comes to any sin that just relates to a person and God. However, if my friend was embarrassed because of those who listened, people believed the lashon hara, and now he was embarrassed. He was affected adversely. As a result of this, he suffered either physically or financially. Either, let's say some people beat him up based on what I said, or let's say said, I'm not going to do business with a scoundrel like that, so he lost out financially. Or people were nasty to him as a result of this. If I want to do tshuva, this is the same as any avera, any time I've sinned against a fellow Jew. Even if I go through Yom Kippur, and even if a person dies after 120, in mechaper, the person's not forgiven until he appeases the friend. Okay, and therefore, what do I do if I've spoken lashon hara about someone and they were hurt? I've got to ask forgiveness. And then if he is appeased and forgives me, and he says, and if once my friend forgives me, so now it's just a sin between me and God. In other words, if I speak ill about a person, right away it's between me and God. But if I spoke ill about that person and he was damaged, now it's both. It's between me and God and between me and a friend. So the first thing I got to do is take care of me and the friend, make sure that I've gotten his forgiveness. Once that's happened, now I've got to repent for the sin between me and God. Okay, now look at this next line. Let's say my friend has no idea that I spoke lashon hara against him. Until now, he was having a good day. If I want to achieve forgiveness, what does the Chafetz Chaim say here? Tzarich legalos lo masha asa negdo shelo kedin. I now have to go to him and I've got to say, listen, man, I'm really sorry to ruin your day, but I've got to tell you what I did that was against halacha, what I spoke about you that was bad, what I spoke about you that was nasty. And I've got to ask forgiveness on this. Since I know, shal yodo nisvav lo davar zeh. So because I know that this guy was damaged, I've got to, the only way I could do tshuva here is because it's to tell the person what I did wrong, how I hurt him, and now to ask forgiveness. But you see what the Chafetz Chaim just did here? He said, even in a case, it's one thing, everyone would agree, yeah, if the guy knew he was damaged. Okay, the guy knew, now I got to go over and ask Mechila. But the Chafetz Chaim says, even if the person never knew that he suffered, even if he never knew that the lashon hara was spoken against him, he doesn't even know he was damaged, I have to go inform him. This flies in the face of what we saw from Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, who was older than the Chafetz Chaim. We saw earlier on the bio that Rabbi Yisrael Salanter was born in 1810. So he's got 28 years on the Chafetz Chaim. The Chafetz Chaim was born in 1838. So he's 28 years older. The Chafetz Chaim would have looked to Rabbi Yisrael as being from the previous generation, who had contact with earlier rabbis than he did. Rabbi Yisrael was of the belief, it was in a very strong position that if someone doesn't know, I don't have a right to tell them. Why? Just because I want to assuage my feelings of guilt? I have a right to ruin that person's day and cause them pain? Absolutely not. Here the Chafetz Chaim says that's exactly what I need to do. If I want to do teshuvah, that's what I need to do. Fascinating. I never really realized this before until a couple of years ago. You'll soon see the sources that point this out to me. The next source that you see there on the bottom of the page, Mem Zayin, and then also Mem Ches, that's the commentary that the Chafetz Chaim himself wrote to Chafetz Chaim, and he tells you what his source was. And he basically says the source was Rabbeinu Yonah, who was a Rishon, one of our very early Torah commentaries, in his ethical work, in his Musar Sefer called Sha'arei Teshuvah. Rabbeinu Yonah speaks this out, and that's what Rabbeinu Yonah says. Rabbeinu Yonah says here it is. We're going to see what Rabbeinu Yonah said. It's on page 3. Rabbeinu Yonah says in his Sha'arei Teshuvah that that's exactly the halacha. In other words, the Chafetz Chaim wasn't on his own saying, look, I know this is difficult to swallow, but you can't achieve mechila without telling the person how you've wronged him. The Chafetz Chaim says, I got this from a Rishon, from someone way earlier than Rav Yisrael Salanter. This was from Rabbeinu Yonah, the famous Rabbeinu Yonah. Let's look at the bottom of page 3. Here's the Rabbeinu Yonah. This is Rabbeinu Yonah in his Sha'arei Teshuvah. He says, V'Ravi, he's talking about how to do Teshuvah. Im Yashuv Bala Lashon B'Teshuvah. If, let's say, someone who sinned with Lashon Hara wants to engage in Teshuvah and sincere repentance, Tzarech Levakesh Mechila Lasher Mutzach Lo Mizam Lashono. He's got to ask forgiveness from the person he damaged through his tongue. V'lo Yizkar Mispar Kulam. And the problem with that is it's very hard for a person to even remember who has spoke ill. If we're not careful with our tongue, we're speaking ill about people all the time. How are we even going to remember? And then you have other scenarios where even if I do remember who I've harmed, the victim, meaning it was Reuven who I harmed, he may not even be aware. He didn't even know that I spoke Lashon Hara against him. Yispayish lo diyam, and I'm embarrassed to go over to him and let him know. And I'm embarrassed to go over and tell him to say, hey, listen, I got to ask you forgiveness, but this is what I did bad to you. So I've got to first fess up. So he says, therefore, but he says, that's what's so hard about Teshuvah. So Rabbeinu Yonah is saying, so avoid the problem in the first place. Don't speak Lashon Hara. But what do you see Rabbeinu Yonah saying? And this is what the Chafetz Chaim was getting from him. I've got to do it. If I really want to do Teshuvah, if I spoke Lashon Hara about someone, the only way to really get Teshuvah is to let the person know what I've done wrong. And even though the person doesn't even know that I hurt him with Lashon Hara, I got to let him know. So the Chafetz Chaim was basically relying on this Rabbeinu Yonah. But now we saw that Rav Yisrael Salanter had this philosophy that I'm not supposed to do that. So we basically have this machlokes that's going on. You have the Chafetz Chaim who is relying on Rabbeinu Yonah, and then you have Rav Yisrael Salanter on the other side who says, no, what right do you have? So we've got this very interesting machlokes that seems to exist. When I was in yeshiva, I heard about this, that this machlokes did exist. And what I was told was, the way people explained it was just saying that when it came to issues of Musar, when it came to issues of ethics, Jewish ethics, Rav Yisrael Salanter, even though he's living in the 1800s, he had the status of a Rishon. He was such a tzaddik, he had achieved such high levels of understanding of the Torah's concept of Musar, of ethics, of Ben Adam L'Chavero, that even though he and Rabbeinu Yonah were worlds apart in terms of generations, he was considered a sparring partner with him. That's the way I remember my Rabbi in yeshiva telling me about this. Fascinating, because normally we don't say that. A Rishon doesn't argue with it. An Achron doesn't argue with a Rishon, someone so much earlier than him. The way I heard it explained was that Rabbi Yisrael Salanter was considered a Rishon when it comes to issues involving Musar. That was the way I heard this in yeshiva. But then a couple of years ago, I saw something that was mind-boggling, and I want to share it with you. That source, we just don't have time for it. It's at the bottom, at the top of page 4. That is a contemporary, not contemporary of mine, but it's a rabbi who was living just until a few years ago, Rabbi Erlanger. He was a Rebbe in Yerushalayim. He was from a German background, but he was a Rebbe in Yeshiva Kol Torah, and he wrote a commentary to Sha'arei Teshuvah, and he struggles with this in Sha'arei Teshuvah. Is that, how does Rabbeinu Yonah say this? What Rabbi Yisrael Salanter says seems to make so much more sense, that you don't have a right to cause more pain. So he's struggling with it. But in other words, the fact that he's struggling with it, everyone is, because Rabbi Yisrael Salanter seems to make more sense. But that was what Rabbeinu Yonah said. We're going to go to the bottom of page 4. Here's a brief biography of Rav Aaron Soloveitchik. Rav Aaron Soloveitchik was a brother of the very famous Rav Yasha Ber, Rav Yosef Dov Soloveitchik, and Rav Aaron Soloveitchik lived in New York and Chicago. And Rav Aaron Soloveitchik was a younger brother. He passed away in 2001, and towards the end of his life, he had been stricken with a debilitating stroke. I remember once being at a wedding where he was related to the chassan, So he was at the wedding, and he spoke a little bit at the wedding. They brought a microphone to him, and it was painful to watch. Here was this person, obviously was a genius, and he was trapped in this body that wasn't cooperating with him. But he was a tzaddik, and he was a massive Talmid Chacham as well. So I'm going to share with you here. You see here, there's a beautiful little bio about him. You see on the bottom of page 4. We'll just quickly look at that. He was born, there it is, in 1917 to 2001. He was a son of the famous Rav Moshe Soloveitchik, a grandson of the famous Rav Chaim Soloveitchik. His family first moved to Poland in 1920. Interestingly, when he was in Poland, his Rebbe, who was hired to be his personal teacher, was Rav Yitzchak Hutner, who would go on to become the Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshiva Chaim Berlin in New York. And that is fascinating, because when Rav Soloveitchik eventually came to New York and finished his learning and his time in yeshiva, he actually, his first job that he had, not his first job, one of his first jobs that he had was as a Rebbe teaching in Yeshiva Chaim Berlin, where again his Rebbe was Rav Hutner. So that's very fascinating. He also was very famous giving shiurim in Yeshiva University, and also in Chicago. He was in the Skokie Yeshiva for many years, and then he began his own yeshiva called Brisk in Chicago. That's a brief bio on Rav Aaron Soloveitchik. He wrote numerous svarim. We're going to take a look here at a sefer that he wrote that was on the Rambam's Hilchos Deos here. And again, before I saw this, I was not even aware that the sefer existed, but he gives us some fascinating insight into this disagreement between what the Chafetz Chaim wrote in his sefer, basically relying on Rabbeinu Yonah, that you got to go to someone who you wronged and ask for forgiveness, even if the person was not aware that he was wrong, versus Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. I want to read this inside. This is priceless. So he writes as follows. If you look in what we saw earlier, the Chafetz Chaim's work on how to do Teshuvah, if you've spoken Lashon Hara, look in Chelek Aleph, the first section, Klal Daled, section 4, in book 1, section 4, Sif Yud Beis, paragraph 12. Isa, it's brought down. Shimecha diber Lashon Hara neged chavero. If someone spoke Lashon Hara against their friend, v'asa tshuva, now wants to do tshuva, he's got to go over and appease. He's got to ask for forgiveness the person who he spoke Lashon Hara against. Even if the person never knew about it, the Chafetz Chaim wrote that if I never knew, even if Reuven never knew about it, I still have to go over to him. And even though that might ruin his day, I got to do that. And he relied on Rabbeinu Yonah. That's what Rabbeinu Yonah says. Vishamati, I heard something beautiful. Me'agon Rav Yitzchak Hutner Zatzal, who was his Rabbi. He said this, obviously, Rav Hutner obviously heard this in the yeshivas in Lithuania. This was a famous account that was going around back then. When Rav Yisrael Mera Cohen, when he finished writing his sefer, which was going to become known as Chafetz Chaim, and now he wants some letters. He wants haskamos. He wants rabbinic approbation letters, as most Sfarim have in the beginning. Nasa Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. He traveled to Rabbi Yisrael Salanter to get a letter. Ubikesh mimeno shiten lo haskama al sifro. And he requests of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, look at this magnificent work I just put together, all the laws of Lashon Hara. Can you please write a letter of approval that I could print in the Sefer? Rabbi Yisrael Salanter Analo. Rabbi Yisrael answered, She'elo yachaliten los haskama. I don't give out such letters. Kolzman she'enu ma'ayin b'sefer mitchila so'ad sofo. I will not write such a letter unless I go through the Sefer from beginning to end. HaChafetz Chaim hishir us a Sefer. So he said, fine, I really want your letter. I'm willing to share my manuscript with you, and please go through it from beginning to end, and then please write me a letter. After several days of Rav Yisrael going through it, Chazar Labeso Shal Rav Yisrael Salanter, the Chafetz Chaim returns to his house with Shaloso, and he asks him, can you please write me a letter of approval for my sefer? Rav Yisrael Salanter Amar, Rav Yisrael says, I went through with incredible depth. I went through everything you did. Everything you wrote in your sefer is absolutely true. There's only one issue I have with your sefer. What is that? It's what the Chafetz Chaim wrote. That if, let's say, Reuven spoke Lashon Hara against Shimon, also tshuva, and he wants to do tshuva. That Reuven has to go visit Shimon and say, Shimon, even though you don't know that I wronged you, I'm telling you now that I wronged you, so I could ask mechila. That's what the Chafetz Chaim wrote. And the Rishon says, I'm not happy with that. Amar Rabbi Yisrael Salantra Chafetz Chaim Shedavar Zeh Eino Nachon. That is not right. It doesn't make sense. It does not make sense that just because I want to achieve mechila, I have a right to cause this person anguish, to let this person know that I spoke lashon hara about him. V'im lo yotzi siv zeh mitoch hasefer. If you do not take that out, that halacha out of your book, lo yachol litin lo haskama. I cannot give an approval, even though 99.9% of your sefer is spot on, and I love it. There's that one line in there. I cannot write a letter of approval if you do not remove that line. HaChafetz Chaim monolos. So what did Chafetz Chaim answer? Shulo chidish didn't say. I didn't make this up. I'm just quoting what Rabbeinu Yonah wrote in Sharei Teshuvah, Sif Reish Zayin, and we saw that above. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter Amarlos. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter says, Ani Yodea Hazeh. I know your source, and I know that Rabbeinu Yonah. Avalanu Muchrachim Lomar. We are forced to say, Rabbeinu Yonah mechaven lemakom shechad shediber lashon hara nagdo shama shu diber lashon hara nagdo. That when Rabbeinu Yonah said that you have to ask permission, you have to ask forgiveness, he was only speaking in a case where the guy knew that I spoke lashon hara about him. But in a scenario where the person never know, Rabbeinu Yonah never would have said such a thing. It doesn't make sense. He knows you spoke about him. He might not know the full speech. He doesn't know all the stuff you said. So there he says, you got to go over and tell him. Okay, why? Because the guy already know that he was humiliated. He already know that he was spoken negative against. He just doesn't know the details. In that case, I got to go over and tell him. But if the guy never knew at all, what right do I have to tell him? If, let's say, Shimon never knew in the first place that I spoke anything bad against him, how is it possible? Rabbeinu Yonah could not possibly have been learning that if the guy never knew in the first place, he was walking around happy as a clam, having a good day, now I go over and I pop his balloon like that? Well, it's not possible. It doesn't make sense. But the Chafetz Chaim says back to him, Rabbeinu Yonah Omer din zestam. He goes, I understand what you're trying to do, Rabbi Yisrael, but come on, let's call a spade a spade. When Rabbeinu Yonah said his din, he didn't say this distinction that you're making. He just said, I always have to ask forgiveness. He didn't say only in a case where the person already has an inkling that I said, but if he never did, then I don't say. He didn't make that distinction. So why would I do that? So Rabbi Yisrael Amar, so Yisrael answers back, Shu Yachol Lizbar Kain. He says, you're entitled to think that way. Aval hu, Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, Pashtale, he says, it is clear to me, Rabbeinu Yonah mechaven rak l'makom shechavero yodea, she'ish diber lashon hara negdo. It's to me, the way to understand this is Rabbeinu Yonah was clear, that was only speaking in a situation where the guy knows that something was said about him, but he doesn't know the specifics. But never in a case where the person was totally oblivious that lashon hara was spoken about him. So this is different than what I had heard in yeshiva. I had heard in yeshiva is that Rabbi Yisrael Salanter could have a flat out machlokas with Rabbeinu Yonah. How? Well, because when it comes to Musar, he's like a Rishon. This is different. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter is saying, my understanding of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, Rabbi Yisrael Salanter is saying, my understanding of Rabbeinu Yonah is that Rabbeinu Yonah only said his din, only said the halacha that you ask mechila, what the guy doesn't know. What does it mean the guy doesn't know? It doesn't mean that he was completely oblivious, because then Rabbeinu Yonah never would have said you go over him, because then you're making him worse, you're making him feel terrible. Rabbeinu Yonah was talking about a case where the guy knew I spoke lashon hara about him, but wasn't aware of the specifics. So he already feels bad. So I'm not now making him feel bad for the first time. He already felt bad. He just didn't know the details. Now I have to tell him the details and ask forgiveness. So it's not that he's arguing with Rabbeinu Yonah. He's saying, this is my understanding of Rabbeinu Yonah. This is how I'm understanding it. Logic is pushing me to say it this way. So neither of them would budge. The Chafetz Chaim was keeping with his pashut reading of Rabbeinu Yonah, And Rabbi Yisrael Salanter says that can't possibly be. It doesn't make sense. So he says, unless you change it and take that out, edit it, I'm not going to give you a letter. So finally, the Chavetz Chaim says, okay, why don't we do this? Chavetz Chaim Itzia. So Chavetz Chaim suggests, Rabbi Yisrael Salanter Yichtov Lo Askama, write me a letter of approval. However, Yichtov Askama, write in your letter, Shekol Din B'Sefer Nachon Chutz Misiv Zeh, that you agree with everything in the book except for that one paragraph, and then say what your issue is with that one paragraph. Commit that to writing. That's what the Chavetz Chaim said. I understand you can't give me a blanket haskama saying you agree with everything. So say you agree with everything except this one line, and this is your point of contention, how you want to say pshat, how you want to argue and understand Rabbeinu Yonah. So he asked Rabbi Yisrael, can you do that? Rabbi Yisrael Salanter Amar Lo. Rabbi Yisrael says back, She'eno yachol lasos kain. I cannot do that. Lasos is that. Why? Mishum sheyeshnam harbe anashim. 90% of people shekorim as a sefer ena mistaklim b'askama. Most people never read the letters of approbation. All they do is they say, "Ooh, wow, look at this. He's got letters from Rabbi A, Rabbi B, Rabbi C. Ooh, must be a good sefer." They don't stop to read. So if my letter was, I agree with everything but this one line, and here's my point of contention, they're not going to read that. They're just going to assume, oh, Rabbi Yisrael Salanter agrees to everything in this book. And then I'll violate lifnei iver. It's like I'm fooling people. As far as I'm concerned, you're wrong about this paragraph. No one's going to read that letter that spells out why I think you're wrong. They're going to think I agree with everything in this book. That's lifnei iver lo sitein mechshol. I'm not allowed to put a stumbling block in front of people. V'nira she'af al pi shepashus lashon Rabbeinu Yonah nira kechavetz chaim. So now Rav Aaron Soloveitchik is saying that the way Rav Hutner explained to him this whole story, he concludes by saying, even though it looks like a plain reading of Rabbeinu Yonah would seem to accord like the Chavetz Chaim, Mikol Makom Shitas Rabbi Yisrael Salanter Mistabri Yoser. The position of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter makes more sense. In other words, I agree you need a shoehorn to fit this into Rabbeinu Yonah, but what Rabbi Yisrael Salanter is saying makes a ton of sense. And then he goes, look later on, Hilchos Teshuvah, fine. We're going to speak about this some more. I thought this is absolutely, absolutely fascinating, that this machlokas exists. If I wronged somebody, it's not limited to Lashon Hara. If I wronged somebody and the person doesn't know about it, and now I want to make good on it. Now, again, if let's say I stole from him and he never knew about it, so again, I could repay. I could put that money back in his account. I could do something like that. Here, it's not. There's nothing tangible I could do. I embarrassed him in front of other people. I spoke ill about him. There's nothing I could do. There's no money I could sneak back into his account. So what do I do? How do I ask forgiveness? So Rav Yisrael Salanter would say, if the person had no clue that you did something, so you don't have a right to tell him. All you should do is just say, stop. Hey, Reuven, do you forgive me for anything I did to you this past year? Do you forgive me? And then that's the best I can do. It's not saying that, okay, that's just as good. That's the best I can do. What can I do? I can't do more. I can't spell it out because I don't have a right to hurt him by telling more. It's the best I can do. And hopefully Hashem's going to have to understand. The Chavetz Chaim, though, seemingly would say, no, depending on Rabbeinu Yonah, leaning on Rabbeinu Yonah, I have an obligation to tell this person exactly what went wrong. I want to share with you one more source here. And I came upon this afterwards, and we're on page 6. I'm tempted. Oh, let me just look at the bottom of page 5. What do I get out of the story? This is an incredible piece of history about this disagreement between Rav Yisrael Salanter and Chavetz Chaim. And 2 points just to get out of this is I have in bullet points there at the bottom of page 5. First of all, look at Rav Yisrael Salanter's incredible concern for others. He's willing to come up with this reading in Rabbeinu Yonah, which is definitely not Pashut Pshat. It's not the simple reading of Rabbeinu Yonah, but he feels compelled to do so because he says, we have to be so concerned about the feelings and the emotional well-being of others. It can't be that just because I want to ask Mechila, I have a right to cause anybody any type of emotional harm. It can't be. Look how concerned he is. And also look at that second part. Look at his incredible degree of honesty. The Chavetz Chaim is begging him for a haskama, and he won't give him a haskama. He says, okay, but write in your letter that you agree with everything but that one part, and then say what your issue is, say what your point is. He says, no, I can't. That won't be honest because not enough people actually read the letter. They just look for who wrote them, and then they jump into the sefer. So they're just going to assume that I'm okay with everything. Look how makbid, how insistent he was on being honest. I think that's wild. All right, let's go to page 6, and this is the last source we're going to look at today. I'm wondering, I saw this afterwards, and I'm wondering, did the Chafetz Chaim come around to the position of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter? We know that the first sefer that he wrote that was really public, that put him out there, was Chafetz Chaim. But he spent 25 years working on his Mishnah Berurah before it was published, and other Sfarim came out later. I'm wondering, is it possible that he eventually did come around to Rabbi Yisrael Salanter's point of view? And let me show you what led me in that direction. This is in the Mishnah Berurah. So this is a piece from the Shulchan Aruch on page 6, Siman Taf Reish Vav. And this is talking about during that Aseret Teshuvah, again, which begins with Rosh Hashanah, how if I've done anything wrong against a friend, against another Jew, I've got to appease that person. It's not enough to go into Yom Kippur saying to God, I'm sorry. If I wronged another Jew, I've got to ask that person for forgiveness. So let's just look. This is based on the Mishnah we started with today in Yoma. So this is the Shulchan Aruch says, interpersonal wrongdoings, Yom Kippur won't help until I actually get appeasement. I have to ask for forgiveness. Even if I've only hurt this other person with words, there was nothing physical. I may have said sticks and stones can break my bones, names will never hurt me. It's not true. Even if I wrong the person with words, I have to appease him. I have to ask for forgiveness. And if he doesn't forgive me the first time I ask, I've got to go ask a second or third time. And then he says, I should have 3 Jews there, so it could be a public declaration of an apology. Okay, all right. And if after 3 times the person won't grant me forgiveness, I'm not chayiv to do any more. That's what the Shulchan Aruch says. The Mishnah Berurah, now let's look down at the bottom of his page at Sif Gimel. So I'm at the bottom page, I got it highlighted there, Sif Gimel. Look what he writes in Sif Gimel. This is the Chafetz Chaim writing this. Yachzor v'yelech, I've got to go back to this person and ask for forgiveness. If I send him a chol pam, and I got to try to appease him each time, b'min ritzoy acher, with a different speech. Now, the speech 1 didn't work the first time, so now try a different angle the second time, the third time. V'shas bakashas mechila, and when I ask for forgiveness, sarich lefaret ma'ashechata lechavero. I've got to tell the person, what did I do wrong? I shouldn't just be vague. I got to tell the person, what did I do wrong? What am I asking forgiveness for? Unless, if I know that my friend will be more anguished, will be more embarrassed, will be more anguished if I spell it out, if I know my friend will be more anguished, more embarrassed if I spell out the sin, then what should I do? Lo yifreit oso. I should not spell it out. I should just say, I'm asking mechila. I want to ask mechila, but don't spell out that sin. So what's the Chafetz Chaim doing there? He's saying that if I wronged somebody, even if the person doesn't know I wronged him, I've got to go ask forgiveness. And if the person still doesn't know I wronged him and I want to ask forgiveness, I'm not allowed to cause him additional pain. So what do I do in such a case? Don't spell out the exact sin. Just say generally, I wronged you, and I want to be good before the year goes out. So I don't know. Part of me says it looks like he came around to the Rabbi Yisrael Salanter because he's not insisting that I've got to name the sin. I got to say exactly what I did wrong. However, he does say that lo yifaredo, so I don't spell out what I did wrong, but I still got to say I did something wrong to you. So it's a little bit more specific. It's not as general as what Rav Sternbach said in the name of Rav Dessler, that I should just go to the guy and say, hey, in the event I did anything wrong to you this past year, could I ask you for mechila? So that it's not that. What he's saying is that I wronged you. I'm too embarrassed. I don't want to hurt you by saying what exactly I did. I wronged you and I want to ask forgiveness. So it's like, it's almost like a mid-ground, a mid-level, the way I'm seeing it. It's not as harsh as what he wrote in Sefer Chafetz Chaim, that I got to go and report exactly what it was that I thought that I said about you, how I embarrassed you in front of a room. If the guy didn't know about it, then I'm causing him an immense amount of pain. But it sounds like I still do have to say something. I wronged you. Not in the event that I caused you some harm this past year. I want to ask mechila. It's got to say, no, Reuven, I definitely did something wrong to you. You weren't aware of it. I want to ask for forgiveness. So it sounds like it's almost like midway. It doesn't sound like it's fully buying into Rabbi Yisrael Salanter's approach. It sounds kind of like it's halfway. So it looks like over the course of his life, the Chafetz Chaim may have budged a little, but it doesn't look like it was a full that he fully gave into what Rabbi Yisrael said. Anyhow, that's what I prepared to speak about today. What I want to get out of here is, Ben Franklin famously said that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, which means if we really want to avoid difficult situations, don't put ourselves in them in the first place. So look, we see that there's this big machlokas. How do I handle? I know I have to, if it's a chet, if it's an avera in interpersonal relationships, I have to ask mechila. And there's this big discussion. What do I do if I hurt someone and he doesn't know about it, she doesn't know about it? How do I ask for forgiveness? It's a complicated scene. You know what the best way to avoid this is? Don't get in that situation to start with. Just like the Chafetz Chaim. That's why he named his book the Chafetz Chaim. We say it in Tehillim. Who is it who desires life? Who desires days and wants to live a good life? Stop our tongues from speaking ill about others. And our lips should not utter items that are deceitful. If we can just control ourselves in the first place, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. We won't have to start and wonder, how do I do tshuva in such a complicated case? So let's commit ourselves. If there's anything that we need to ask forgiveness from another person, let's ask it. If we're nervous the other person doesn't know that we wronged them and we don't want to cause them harm, we have Rabbi Yisrael Salanter definitely to rely on, to say that I don't have a right to cause the person more harm moving forward. But it's not that, okay, that that's the best I could do, is to say, okay, in the event that I harmed you, here's what I want to ask forgiveness. That's the best I can do. He says I don't have a right to say that what I did wrong there. But that's not the best situation. The best situation is don't put myself in that situation to start with. If I could avoid harming other people, I would avoid this whole scenario to start with. All right. I hope everyone has a wonderful day. I hope everyone has a meaningful Rosh Hashanah. And again, Rosh Hashanah, as we said, begins the Aseret Yemei Teshuvah. Hashem should enable all of us to engage in Teshuvah, both in our issues of Ben Adam Makom, all of our relationship we want to heal involving God, but also all of our relationships, Ben Adam Chavero, our interpersonal relationships. Hashem should answer all of our tefillos and should bench each and every one of us with a ksiva v'chasima tova. I'm going to stop